Hello all, so let's get started. Thank you for joining and welcome to this webinar on navigating the EU deforestation regulation ahead of the compliance deadline. So I am Alan Kroeger, the Business Development Director of Satelligence, and I'll be your host for this session. As speakers, we have Leo Bonanni, founder and CEO of Sourcemap, and Alan Kroeger, Director, Nature and Climate of Satelligence. So today, we will talk about the EUDR and the overall challenges that the industry is facing. The EUDR is, as you know, ambitious, and we have an enormous task ahead of us before implementation by the end of the year. Common challenges that we see across sectors, commodities, geographies are, for instance, the traceability requirements. The law requires unprecedented new levels of traceability. Also, the fact that because of EUDR, we continuously need to assess, measure, and verify deforestation risk is something new for a lot of companies. But I have some good news. We are not just here to talk about challenges, but we are actually to talk about solutions and how you can start preparing right now. Because the good thing is a lot is already possible and a lot of developments have happened since the announcement of the regulation. But before we start, first some housekeeping notes. So the session will be divided in 4 different parts. In the first part of the agenda, we'll focus on solutions to tackle some of these pain points that we just mentioned and how Sourcemap and Satelligence can do that together. Then we will move to the main part of our conversation today, which focuses on how you as a company can prepare for the EUDR. Then we move to a concise demo before we finish off with a round of Q&A. So I would like to say that we really want to see an interactive questions. You can share your questions and thoughts through the chat. In principle, this will be anonymous unless you really want us to mention your name. And we will try to answer those questions then at the end of the session. But it also means that for questions that we cannot tackle throughout the sessions, we will still send our answers after the fact to everyone that attended to this webinar. Okay, so before we really get started, I would also like to give the speakers the opportunity to say some words and introduce themselves, starting with you, Leo.
Good day, good morning. Thanks for having me, Nana. It's a pleasure to be here. Leonardo Bonanni, I'm the founder and CEO of Sourcemap, and we specialize in supply chain mapping. So this is the part of EUDR that involves discovering the suppliers, mapping the farms, getting the polygons, the GPS data, all harmonized, all collected, and then ultimately doing the reporting. And what we've seen time and time again is companies are asking for a very authoritative solution to actually assessing forest degradation and deforestation. And so, having worked with Satelligence for years, we decided to partner up to provide exactly that, where we could collect the data, provide the reporting and analytics, and partner with the best, with the longest track record on the deforestation and degradation assessment.
Great, thanks, Leo. Happy to have you. And then also over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Nana. Thank you all for being here. I'm Alan Kroeger, the Director of Nature and Climate at Satelligence, and just as we're sort of the counterweight to what Leo's organization is perfecting, and so we're very much focused on the deforestation detection formula when it comes to the EUDR, and providing globally consistent and near real-time data when it comes to deforestation and degradation, and linking it to the supply chain and other contextual contexts within these sourcing landscapes. So excited to share more about the partnership with everyone today.
Yeah, thanks to the both of you. So we can get started, and before we actually go then to the collaboration overview and the partnership of Sourcemap and Satelligence, I really first want to touch a bit onto some of these solutions to the pain points that we mentioned during the introduction. And I think the big elephant in the room being traceability, at least that's what I often hear. And that is, of course, where the Sourcemap team has a lot of expertise in. So how do you work with this? What is your solution around the traceability question, Leo?
Yeah, we get this question quite a bit. It's traceability is the biggest change, right? A lot of industries have been mapping their supply chains and monitoring deforestation for some time now, especially those high-risk industries that are under EUDR. What's happened, and it's completely changed everything, is that instead of companies mapping their supply chains after their season is over at the end of the year for their corporate sustainability reporting, they now have to map and monitor deforestation before the shipments are allowed onto the European market. And that means a much tighter coupling of mapping and tracing. And with a lot of these raw materials, they're blended in very, very large batches. And so the question I get the most is, how do you have real traceability back to farms with a material like a palm oil or cocoa that is blended and processed from many, many thousands of farms? And the answer is very simply that where you lose traceability and you have to blend the raw materials that originate from many, many different sources, you just have to map all those sources, monitor all those sources, and your due diligence reporting, your due diligence statement is going to be a blend of those. But it does still require a good partnership with your operations team, with the people who understand which batches go into which containers and which containers go into which finished goods.
Yeah, I want to quickly follow up with a question there, Leo. So now we touched kind of on this traceability part, but you already kind of pointed towards right, is that the way that we need to think about this because of the EUDR is very different. Like, it needs to be more real time, but we also talk about tens of thousands, if not millions, of polygons, farms that need to be screened. So or screened and analyzed. So how does that work? Like, how can you make that work? Like, these huge amounts of supply chain data.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, the days of collecting these polygons using spreadsheets and spending weeks and months with an analyst consolidating them are gone. In some industries, you'll have the good fortune of being able to ask at the beginning of the year, which are the farms you're going to source from for the next season, and maybe they're certified or they belong to cooperatives, and that can be done. But it still, needs to be assessed before the shipments even leave for Europe. And certainly, if you find deforestation, you don't want to have to make any changes to what's being shipped to you. So the earlier you can do it, the better, and that favors automating the process. And fortunately now, certainly through Sourcemap, people can upload large files full of polygons, have those automatically screened and the errors cleaned up and accepted or rejected based on the locations and the sizes and other attributes. So there's an automated solution now, but definitely you want to collect those polygons as early as possible, because you need to make any judgment calls long before the shipments are headed to Europe.
Great, thanks, Leo. And Alan, over to you, because I know that Satelligence also works already for a long time in a large number of commodities, and that you also do some supply chain mapping. So how does that work, and how is that complementary to the work that Sourcemap is doing?
Yeah, so very much so where Sourcemap sort of starts and ends is also then where we begin in terms of all of the supply chain sort of geolocation asset information that we've been gathering over the years. So we very much have been focusing over the years on working with the growers and the traders that have been building up their large databases of individual mapped farms in the cocoa and coffee space and concessions in the palm oil space. And so we've created one of the most extensive databases out there in terms of millions of individual cocoa farms and coffee farms, tens of thousands of palm oil concessions. And so those pieces, plus the sort of information and trust built up with our various clients over the years, enables us to get that sort of facility to farm linkage data, which is that sort of last mile of traceability. And so that then combined with the information that Sourcemap is able to gather for those with long extended supply chains, enables us to work better together to sort of complete that formula down to the farm level and check it against sort of long-standing databases that we have.
Okay, great, thank you. And don't worry, we'll touch upon more later on polygon data gathering, traceability when we go to the how to prepare for EUDR part. But now I first want to touch upon a couple of these other pain points. And yeah, we also hear a lot that actually mapping forest reliably, mapping commodities in a good manner is very important as part of the EUDR. But Alan, maybe you can tell a bit about how this is important for the regulation and how you do that.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely essential when it comes to basically having the right forest baseline maps against the cutoff date that the EUDR has set forth, so that you're making sure that you're operating with the right sort of baseline to measure change against. And so that's where Satelligence comes in with, we create our own forest baselines in the different origin countries for these different high-risk commodities. And that's what we're there measuring the change against. And so all of the forests as of December 31st, 2020 are mapped, and that baseline is present in our data system. And then when tracking the change against it, you're then making sure that you're not over or underestimating your areas of compliance risk. And so that's why it's a critical part of this formula.
Great, appreciate it. And yeah, so we talk about deforestation, but I think as part of the regulation, right, there is also a lot of other risk data or information that we should consider. Can you talk a bit to that, Leo? Like, what are other important components beyond just deforestation that are important for this specific regulation piece?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the deforestation assessment, is the one that gets all the attention. It's the high-tech component, and it involves, assessing all these mapped polygons. The other side of the EUDR is a sort of combination of criteria that we bundle under a legality assessment. Mm-hmm. And so the onus here is to make sure that your suppliers, or if you're the buyer yourself, you have the legal right to source from this land. And it has to do with issues that involve indigenous rights, land claims, land rights, and it's very, very specific to each raw material and each country or region where you're sourcing from. And what we do for the legality assessment is really twofold. One is to make sure that we collect the best available documentation, and we're talking about uploading actual PDFs showing business licenses, rights to land to operate, and things like tax IDs. This essentially legitimizes the supply chain. It's like running your suppliers through a watch list, and it's able to be done relatively automatically because we can collect the data through automated requests for information, and then we can scan the documents using automated optical character recognition and translation. That being said, of course, we know that there are raw materials in parts of the world where land rights are not formalized. The best available legality assessment that we can conduct in those parts of the world has to do with farmer organizations, cooperatives, off-takers, their business licenses, and some documentation to prove that they're up to standards. And then we also strongly recommend, and often our customers already have audit schemes in place to further verify the legality of those supply chains.
Great, that's very clear. Thanks, Leo. And before we continue, there was a last point that I wanted to raise, and I guess that's a question to you, Alan. That is on the fact that companies really continuously need to check and verify their supply chains for risks, right? It's different maybe than it used to be in the past, where you took specific moments in time to assess your risk. Now it becomes really real time. So what are ways that you do this within Satelligence?
Yeah, so our system is set up where we use a combination of optical and then radar satellite imagery, and basically with daily updates with daily imagery, and then on basically a weekly or bi-weekly basis provide updates to each of the companies using our system to get the basically near real-time deforestation events. And so that sort of enters into the frame of when a company's thinking about both a risk assessment. Now they can look at all of those detections over time from now back until the cutoff date. And then going forward, they can use the regular alerts as part of their risk mitigation protocol, so that every week, before purchase orders and shipments are made, they can see the latest data to make sure that their shipment is still full of product that is compliant.
Great, thanks a lot. So now we have established basically, right, what both the organizations work on and the solutions that you're solving as part of the EUDR. So now I really would like to dive a little bit deeper into the collaboration piece. Leo, you already touched upon it during your introduction, but could you elaborate a bit further on this partnership in particular and why it works so well?
Absolutely. And look, the interesting thing about EUDR is, depending on whether you're an importer, whether you're a brand or manufacturer that buys from importers, whether you're an exporter, or some combination of the three, you have significantly different obligations under EUDR. And what we're covering here with Satelligence is the end-to-end solution. It's assuming that you play a role of an importer at times, of a brand and manufacturer at times, and of an exporter as well. And what the risk, of course, for EUDR is the heavy penalties levied in the case of being found to have sourcing from deforested areas. I think what we're seeing in terms of companies that work with Satelligence and Sourcemap is also the significant reputational risk, because it's true that in many cases you can collect the due diligence statements from your suppliers and pass them on to the EU as your own, and that's completely okay by law. What we've seen is, in a lot of different sectors, different raw materials, the assessment may not be scrupulous enough, and that it benefits almost everybody to do an additional scan. So what we want to do is make sure you've discovered all of your suppliers, that you have been able to collect firsthand data from them on the supply chain, and that you're able to then send it over to Satelligence for assessment. So that's the starting point. The traceability and the generation of these reports is the most well accepted and standard process. This is where we connect to SAP, to the purchase orders, to the batch lot traceability, and we're able to generate these reports on the fly. But so we really want to give our customers the best protection with regard to this law, and the best assurance that they have no deforestation. And that means collecting that data firsthand, knowing who to collect it from, and then being able to continuously keep those maps up to date and scan them against the Satelligence assessments.
Great, thanks. That's very clear. Alan, you would like to add something to this?
I think it's just about sort of doubling down on Leo's message, is that EUDR, it puts a lot of expectations on a lot of companies of various sizes, and so having there's no single entity that can really meet all of those needs, and so by combining forces in this space, we're able to help both globally dispersed multinational corporations, and then also smaller companies that need to utilize this type of combined technology solution.
Yeah, and maybe touching upon what you mentioned there, like when we talk about companies, like for what kind of companies and sectors or industries would benefit from this partnership in particular, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think those with sort of the much longer supply chain networks, that are quite complicated to sift through and to make all of those connections and all the nodes that make up those supply chains. And so those in the retail space, in the food manufacturing, consumer goods space, auto manufacturers, those in the technology space that need rubber as part of their technology. Those are all the types of companies that I think would be sort of the first actors to benefit off of this collaboration.
Great, thanks. And yeah, maybe a question for you, Leo, first is then like both the organizations, right, you provide a lot, and it sounds also like often you work really together with organizations in a partnership. But of course, that also means that a company needs to supply you as an organization with information to get started. So in what stage does a company need to be to start working with you? What do they need to have internally to make this work?
You know, we've seen it all. So supply chain mapping is not new. It's been around for at least 13 years in its current form, and mapping polygons for deforestation monitoring is also not new. We've started doing that for the Cocoa and Forest Initiative back in 2016, 2017. The companies will find themselves in a number of different situations, and I think the takeaway from me is no matter where you are, you know, there's a solution to automate the remainder of the workflow for EUDR. It's true that a lot of companies with long supply chains or who are used to buying on the open market may not have begun the first step, which is mapping and discovering your actual suppliers and then requesting those polygons, those GPS coordinates of the farms. But many of our customers have already identified their supply chains. They're on good terms with their tier one suppliers, and they're able to ask them to go out and collect the polygon data directly. And so depending on the industry, and this is really the order in which we saw them adopt supply chain mapping, you know, we see the majority of the supply chain being able to be mapped in the first wave of invitations and requests through the platform. And then of course there's some maturity and enablement that needs to happen. Some people need to have installed the right apps or buy the phones or hire the people to go out and walk the perimeters and map the forests and the farms. And so, you know, what we say, it's been done. It's been done in your industry, and it's been done for the raw materials you buy. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. Given that the implementation, you know, should really happen by the end of this year, we recommend companies that are at the beginning of the stage, who've never collected polygons, start soon, so they can have a good wave of data collection, 6 to 12 weeks, and then follow up with anybody who's lacking the tools. Make sure that everybody in their supply chain is able to map the polygons and collect the necessary legality documents well before the end of 2024.
Great, thank you. And Alan, is that the same starting conditions as well for work on deforestation risk assessments at Satelligence side?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, and anyone can start with us essentially at ground zero, because one of the things that we produce is these the commodity maps themselves. And so if a company, even if they just know which countries that they're sourcing from, that is like a starting point at which sort of risk assessments can be done as they start to build up their traceability levels.
Okay, great. So thanks to both of you to set the scene here with me and talking about solutions rather than creating more problems for everyone. So let's dive a little bit deeper into some of these really specific requirements and how you as a company actually need to prepare for the EUDR. So now I would really like to give the floor to both of you, Leo and Alan, to guide us through some of the materials that you've prepared for our audience.
Happy to kick it off. So look, I think what needs to be restated is this is a business process like any other, and it's been done for years and years, and it's a process that can be automated to a large degree, and that your suppliers are already accustomed to participating in for their other customers. It does involve a few steps, and so what I've done here is I've highlighted as an importer. Really, this is also true for a brand or manufacturer. What you need to do, what Sourcemap and Satelligence take on, and what your suppliers need to do on the other side of things. And it really is a due diligence process where you need to involve your suppliers, right? There's no way you can do this without collecting first-party data firsthand from the suppliers themselves. You know, all you need to do as a brand manufacturer importer is provide or invite your suppliers, the ones you know, whatever tier they're in, provide the list of product codes that you are importing and the purchase orders that they're coming in on. and then ultimately submit those due diligence statements to the EU with whatever frequency those shipments are arriving. What we're going to do, Sourcemap and Satelligence, is as soon as possible, we're going to make sure the supply chain has been mapped, the polygons have been collected, that they've been cleaned and harmonized, and any errors or omissions have been corrected. And we're going to also do the legality assessment, all of that, so that there are no surprises, right? The best outcome is you map well before the shipments happen, you have assurance that there's no risk of deforestation or legality issues, and then it doesn't so much matter which farms go into which shipments, because you can confidently upload the list of all potential farms that go into each shipment. Your suppliers are going to really have a two-phase experience here. They're going to map their supply chains, upload their data. They're going to see any errors or omissions automatically as soon as they upload their data, so that they have time to work out the kinks and re-upload the data. All of that happens without any need for human intervention, and they're going to make sure to upload all their legality documents. At the end of the day, depending on your traceability, you may have an additional step, which is asking the suppliers which of these farms, which of these forests corresponded to which of these import bills of lading, these purchase orders. And that depends on the size of the company, the number of purchase orders you make, and the granularity of the traceability. At times, you might have a list of all the farms in a country. Other times, you might be able to get it down to a single co-op or a single list of farms that was segregated through the supply chain. And so you know exactly that it was those farms that went into that purchase order, that bill of lading. But that second step really depends on the industry. But so that's it. So most of the work here is really handled by the software. And at various times, you're going to be asking your suppliers to provide you information and validation. And your suppliers are going to be responding by uploading the same data that they upload for all of their customers.
Right, yeah, I liked what you said, Leo, about no surprises, and I think that's part of the interesting component of combining work on both transparency and traceability that comes with using this sort of geospatial component here. And so this is an example of the traceability and the upstream mapping that Satelligence does in different sectors. And so this is an example of our forest baseline mapping that we've done in West Africa, and then all of the geolocation information for direct supply chains in the cocoa space. So these are all of the polygons that have been mapped across the industry, and so represents both an understanding of where is there visibility in the footprint of cocoa, but then also in the commodity mapping component, you can see where is there still a lack of visibility where cocoa is being produced, but where it's also not been mapped yet by the industry. And if you go to the next slide, this is an example in the palm space of, there are tens of thousands of palm concessions, but then we also map where is there a palm oil footprint, and so you can then see where there is known concessions, and then where is there maybe smallholder palm or palm that's been grown where concession boundaries haven't been identified, and that's part of. If you go to the next slide, that's part of what can be done with visual inspection as well, and so you can see. Here's a mill. There are numerous concessions that are either associated or independent concessions around there. So they have various linkages or lack thereof to that mill. But there's also then palm oil that we know is growing in that area to produce fresh fruit bunches that need to go somewhere. And so having not established whether that's a concession or whether it's smallholders with traceability to that mill is part of an understanding of what are the gaps that need to be closed as part of the risk mitigation process.
Great, thanks. And maybe I also want to break in here a bit to get one of the questions from the audience, because it ties into what we just discussed here before, and also the polygon mapping. And it's to you, Leo. So I guess the question is, and if so, how does Sourcemap help suppliers, like also small farmers, collect their polygons?
Great question. We've been there and done that since the very first widely available technology to do farm mapping. Really, what we work for the big importers, the big brands and manufacturers. What they do is make available a series of free tools for farmers to do the mapping. And so at the end of the day, there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to polygon mapping. You can use very widely available smartphones. You don't need an internet connection, and you can use free mobile applications to conduct the mapping. And so we've seen that the open source tools are the best ones, and we certainly make them, we make instructions available for how anybody in the supply chain can get to the level of maturity that they need without really investing in any specialized technology. There is an interface for the legality assessment. There's an interface for uploading polygons, and there's an interface for traceability. All of those are free to the suppliers. All of those are as simple as possible, and they use basic file formats like PDFs for documents or spreadsheets for uploading transaction records and polygons. So at every step of the way, the process is free for suppliers. It's supported by our outreach and support team, and there is a wide variety of tools and formats that we accept so that the process can be done really any way that the farmers choose.
Thanks, great. So please continue with the part on the polygon collection and screening, Leo.
Yeah, I don't, this is, I've touched on this a little bit. I just want to emphasize collecting GPS polygons is well-established practice. It is way too much work to do by hand. And in some cases, you don't want to involve analysts or any kind of direct human manipulation of the data for the sanctity of and the accuracy of what you have. Very simply, what we found over the years is users will upload these polygon files. Maybe it's the first time that they do it. So they're going to need immediately to get some feedback. If there's any polygons that are in the wrong place, the wrong size, the wrong number of vertices, that they're not accurate enough, or they're overlapping with each other, those are going to be detected and returned to the user right away. So it's very simple, but it needs to be done. And of course, when you're uploading thousands of polygons at a time, you need to do it in a very fast and automated way. And that's what allows us to, make the work as fast as possible for the suppliers, so that the importers have a harmonized database of all the polygons that then can be run against this intelligence risk assessment.
Great. Yeah, and then I think as part of once you've done the polygon collection, one of the other big pieces of collecting information is understanding what is the presence of forests to make those initial compliance checks against. And so one of the things that Satelligence does, as I touched on earlier, is we create our own forest and commodity baselines so that you can make sure that any deforestation detection is based on an understanding of where is there still remaining natural forests that meet the definitions within the regulation, and where are there other tree crops like rubber plantations, pulp and paper plantations that which should be excluded from that space, so that you're not basically over collecting information that would lead to an overload and a lack of accuracy when it comes to these types of compliance situations. So if you go to the next slide, this is just another example, but in the cocoa space, where we have looked at the remaining forests in West Africa across different classes. So we mapped for primary forest, disturbed forest, and regrowth forest. And then we mapped the distribution of all of the cocoa growing areas in these different countries. And that's what enables us to basically set this as a baseline for the regulation, so that companies can understand where is there an area of production that has been there before the cutoff date and without the presence of forests, so that they can make sure that the information they use for initial compliance statements is accurate and consistent across all of their sourcing regions. I think if we go to the next, then yeah, Leo, you can touch about the legality assessment part that you've raised earlier.
Yeah, look, we've touched on this briefly. So I know in the interest of time, I think it's just important that it's not just mapping. you do need to perform a general due diligence. You think of it as asking your suppliers to provide you with their tax ID and so that you can verify them against other databases. Depending on the country, the raw material, the legality assessment asks for different documents, different ID numbers, and really it's a due diligence exercise in the sense that you need to make sure that you've asked everybody to provide evidence that they're operating within norms and that they have the requisite policies and procedures in place when it comes to respecting indigenous rights and land rights. And that's all bundled in. But like I mentioned before, if it's an area with known land tenure issues, an audit or certification scheme is recommended, and it's probably already in place.
And I think, sorry, Nana, there was another question from the audience that you wanted me to tackle first.
Yeah, so also on the deforestation part, there was a question, and it was also about national maps, I believe. So there was a question for you on how to match the deforestation maps for countries that do not have historical data on forest areas. So how do you tackle that?
Yeah, so so luckily we don't rely on countries or other entities publishing their own sort of historical forest maps or historical deforestation maps. We use different basically satellite data from Sentinel-1 satellite, Sentinel-2, and we use that as part of both creating the forest maps, and then also you can use that plus Landsat to go back all the way to the 1980s, and so that's where we look at where has there been forest and where has there been disturbance and change over time across any country, and this is what makes it sort of the globally consistent component of our data, in that we both can provide these global maps for each country when it comes to forests and historical deforestation, but then we can also curate it to meet their own national definitions of forests and deforestation as well, which comes into play with EUDR as well, because you need to both meet the EUDR regulations, but then also in some cases you need to consider the national legislation when it comes to forests as well. And so, yeah, we're able to do that separate from having to rely on any government mapping in that case, which a bit ties in here with basically providing these risk assessments at a jurisdictional level for different countries, and that's again because we use the historical deforestation information in each country that we need to evaluate for clients, and so it's both based on. We can look at deforestation in general, so any natural forest loss over the last several years, let's say. But then we can also, in having the commodity maps, we can see where different commodities have replaced natural forest in different subnational regions, and that's what enables us to create these jurisdictional risk maps, where you can see where in Indonesia are there higher risk areas of commodity palm oil driven deforestation, where in parts of Ghana are there higher risk areas of cocoa driven deforestation, and that's all based on the stuff I presented earlier with regards to having the commodity maps and having that historical deforestation information. And if you go to the next slide, this is basically taking the information that's been aggregated at the national and subnational level and turning it into weighted risk ratings to individual farms or concessions. And so when a company wants to understand which of their suppliers has higher and lower levels of farms that are high risk of deforestation or low risk, this is where this type of data can be utilized to understand where do you have higher and lower supplier-based and supply chain exposure to deforestation risk. And we do that by looking at historical deforestation levels and how recent it was, how severe it was, and how close it was to the actual supply chain assets in question. And if you go to the next slide, this is just another element of the legality component where we supplement a bit of what Sourcemap does by looking at the actual forest cover based legality components. So especially in a place like Brazil that has the forest code, we can use our historical deforestation information and the forest mapping to determine, in the soy landscape, which of the soy parcels that you're sourcing from, you may not have a deforestation issue with regards to the EUDR baseline year, but you may have an issue with them being non-compliant to the forest code based on the amount of forest remaining on their parcel. And so those are the types of data components that can also be tied together with this intelligence data. And I think, yeah, if you go to this next section here, is just a little bit more detail on the deforestation detection that I talked about earlier. And so it's all about providing not just the deforestation detection, but then all the contextual intelligence that comes from the supply chain information that Sourcemap gathers, and then we gather to understand, what type of forest is being lost, how much forest is being lost, and where does it overlap with the supply chain assets that are connected to your supply chain. And so if you go to the next slide, this is basically just it's a summary of what is the type of data that can be extracted from this type of methodology. So you can see, here it's 7 hectares of forest that was lost. It was regrowth forest, and it took place. The last detection date was October 2023 of 4 hectares. And then there are supply chain links. It's in Indonesia, and it's overlapping with this concession. And so that automatically flags it to you as this is a non-compliant concession, and then the connection to the mill is then essential for determining how do you address this in your risk mitigation protocol with this company.
And then I'll just chime in on sort of the conclusion. Although I have to stress it's a continuous process, and that's why we're partnering with Intelligence, because the assessments need to be conducted as often as possible, and certainly as often as the POs are being generated and the shipments are being sent to Europe. Look, we've done it through a request for traceability for every PO. That's more of a request for information, a questionnaire type, and we've done it through triggers from ERPs like SAP in the case where there are thousands and thousands of purchase orders that need mapping. In any case, with every due diligence statement, we need to know the material code, the raw material origins, and we generate as many of those as there are materials and different sets of origins. By the way, if a shipment contains multiple materials, multiple statements have to be prepared. So again, it's a task that's better suited for a computer, and we're happy to automate also the part in which it integrates with ERP. Every time those statements are generated, they're being checked in real time against the legality and against the Satelligence data. And that's because I think there's a question in here about due diligence assessments over time. So if you're buying from the same geolocation multiple times, are we going to assess the compliance? And the short answer is yes. We're assessing all the time. Any suspicion, any flag gets raised as soon as it's discovered, and hopefully weeks or months before it could become part of a shipment, so that we can figure out whether there needs to be a corrective action, whether there is a risk of deforestation or degradation or legality problems, and then resolve those problems well ahead of the shipment date. I think we had just provided a couple of screenshots of what the real software looks like. I think in the interest of time, it's a lot of data and it's a lot of software. So I'll do mine and then pass it over to Alan. But the complexity of traceability is that you have to involve all the intermediaries in a supply chain, and so every step in the chain needs to be mapped, needs to be registered, and needs to be a willing participant, at least insofar as making sure that they do buy from the farms that have been mapped. Even if you can get all this data from your tier ones, you still need assurance that the tier ones know what intermediaries the goods are passing through on their way between the forests, the farms, and you. So this is just an example of a palm oil supply chain going from smallholder and estate producers through various steps in the distribution and milling and export. What you have in the middle is obviously a map. That's what's going to be used to ground the satellite analysis. What you have on the right is a transaction diagram that shows the commercial linkages in the supply chain. Essentially, map is one thing, but to prove that different companies or different entities supply each other is really the bulk of traceability and due diligence. And then this is the data, and these are the interfaces through which then the analysis with Satelligence is able to be conducted and through which the due diligence statements, they might look like PDFs at the end of the day, they're actually going to be coming from a very large graph database, just like this one. Over to you.
Yeah, and so essentially, where all of those supply chain nodes and the mapping that Sourcemap has there, it all sort of culminated there in peninsular Malaysia in that particular example, and so here is just an example of sort of the different layers of the contextual intelligence that I mentioned earlier, where we have all of the palm oil that's been mapped in the region. We have all the remaining forests. We have the different mills that either are currently verified as deforestation free, or those that are not, where we've detected deforestation either in the plantations, concessions that are linked to them, or within a sort of a reasonable sourcing radius around each of those mills. And so this type of information, along with some other elements of non-compliance, such as peatlands and protected areas. And so both when you're thinking about, especially in the palm oil case with EUDR, you can then also use this information to look at the NDPE type of commitments as well when you're trying to meet an understanding of your compliance with either your own voluntary commitments and then also with these regulatory requirements as well. And so this information then overlaid with the supply chain mapping that Sourcemap does sort of completes that circle of a EUDR compliance.
Great, thanks Leo and Alan for guiding us through some of these EUDR elements, what is required to comply, and showing also the actual solution to do that, and perfectly in time as well. So now I'd like to move indeed to some further questions. Taking a couple from the audience, and I think we can take 2 or 3 before we wrap it off. I first want to share a question with Alan, which was on the fact that if global forest data for natural forest loss is not available for all the countries, is there any other database for this information available?
Yeah, so I think kind of attached to what I was saying previously, in that there's no one map to rule them all type of data out there, and so we do as do sort of other mapping efforts, other global data sets on tropical moist forest maps, primary forest maps that different entities and academic institutions have created. Those compiled with our own forest baseline mapping sort of inform each other. And so that enables us both those sort of static maps plus our ability to look back into 40 plus years of forests. We can then see which forests have remained basically unchanged or undisturbed, and then we can look at those forests that have been logged over but regenerated over multiple decades. And that's how you then get to a sort of a segmentation of where are the primary forests that are agreed upon both in our own mapping and those authorities like different academic institutions, Greenpeace primary forest maps, and then those that have been disturbed that we know are part of logging areas, and those that are clearly regrowth forests in heavily disturbed areas. And so I think there's never going to be one authority on that type of map, but it's certainly one that the combination and hybrid approach that we've built is quite what is required for this type of compliance situation.
Great, thanks. Leo, there's also a question for you, and it's about enforcing of the EUDR, which is also interesting because, of course, the EUDR itself is not only a lot of work for the industry and companies, but also for the European Commission and competent authorities that need to enforce this regulation. So how do you actually see this process? Like when the regulation is implemented, how will this be enforced by the Commission?
They have not provided final guidance on the exact format of data or the platform through which the data should be shared. I'm talking about the due diligence statements here. All that we know is that a substantial amount of the data that's being uploaded, the supply chain maps, is going to be independently verified by the European Union. We know that they have set up various research initiatives to support that process. And of course, we're also actively engaged in conversations to make sure that they're aware of the state of the art when it comes to transacting in large volumes of traceability and mapping data, since we've been doing it for quite a while now. I will say it looks like right now it'll be a sample-based approach. I think they mentioned something as close as 9% of high-risk areas are going to be scrutinized, and the sample-based approach will probably involve GIS analysis that runs it against some of the more widely available legality and forest maps. We don't expect a huge number of hits because we're looking at a very small time window from 2021 to the present, but 9% is a large sample, and so as they get their digital capabilities up to speed, it's going to mean that we were going to recommend to our customers certainly that they have mapping and risk assessment done at least 3 months before any shipments happen, so that any missing data, any corroboration, any audits still have time to happen.
Great, thanks. And I want to follow up with a question, and I think you can take that first as well, Leo, but also curious to hear Alan's thoughts after. So we see that as an organization that when we work with companies, like naturally, of course, companies closer to the production are a bit further ahead with all these steps that we just went through. But when we think about downstream companies like retailers, when do they need to start preparing for the EUDR? And how much can they rely on their suppliers to carry out the work, and what do they need to do themselves? It's basically 2 questions. Would you like to take that one first, Leo?
No, absolutely. Sorry about that, I was on mute. A lot of the work does go back to the suppliers. The good news is the suppliers have already received requests from most of their customers to do the work. The one thing I will say, and you can perform a cursory analysis based on the region. You can perform an analysis even with intelligence based on the sub-region and within the commodity plantations about the likelihood that you're exposed. But the shift to mapping and traceability means that you cannot infer the supply chain. When it comes to EUDR, you need to get firsthand data from your suppliers, and that's so ultimately at the end of the day, we've seen our customers co-invest, we've seen them support in the process, we've seen them hire third parties to perform a lot of the mapping, but it needs to be done with the consent, the participation, and really the willingness of suppliers. So whether the suppliers carry the burden is up to their relationship with the brands, but it is important that they participate and be available in case there are any red flags, so that they can perform any corrective actions as needed.
Great, thanks. Then I would like to go to a final question before we round this webinar off, and that's to you, Alan. It's also about other ecosystems. So we talk now, mainly purely about deforestation, but there are ambitions, or at least ideas, to add additional ecosystems to the scope. Can you tell a bit more about that?
Yeah, no, we certainly been seeing people starting to ask the question, and there's more of a trend of those sort of leading companies moving from a zero deforestation commitment to a zero conversion commitment, which covering more broader ecosystems. And it's kind of based on the scope of what the EU Commission laid out, where within the first year, they'll be doing an assessment to see whether or not to add other wooded land to basically to the regulation, which basically is the savanna type landscapes that you find, and dry forests and other ecosystems like that. And then within 2 years, they'll be looking to discuss and decide on the inclusion of other natural ecosystems. And so that could include some of the other ecosystems that I mentioned that we've already been mapping, such as peatlands and mangroves, but also other types of wetlands, tropical grasslands could all potentially fall into the scope, and that will be determined within the next couple of years by the Commission.
Great, thank you. With this question, I would also like to end the webinar. So thanks a lot, Leo and Alan, for your contribution, and to you, the audience, for your engagement. I want to conclude with that. Yes, we understand that the EUDR seems daunting and overwhelming at times, but I hope Leo and Alan showed that it's definitely doable to get this done. So we are in this together, and we are all working towards the same goal, and which is, I need to remind you of this, it's not just to comply, but we want to source sustainably and stop deforestation. So there's no time like today to get started. And if you need help with that, you know where to find Leo and Alan. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.